Welcome back to part 2 of my workbench build. At the end of part 1, I just finished assembling the base, and I mentioned that I'd be going back a little bit in this video to talk about the installation of the leg vise. So I just made a pretty big and very dumb mistake. No, too far. Okay, that's more like it. We were talking about prepping the front 2 legs by drilling dog holes in the front right leg and installing a leg vise on the front left leg. But before I can get to that, I need to prep the stock for the leg chop. I'm making it from this beautiful piece of 12-quarter walnut, and after I milled it up, I had a couple knot holes in the back side that need to be filled with epoxy. Other than that, it was basically ready to go. With both the chop and the leg ready for joinery, I started by drilling the leg. The leg needs a counterbore deep enough to accept a bushing that comes with the vise, and then a through hole for the shaft. The leg was thicker than the throw on my drill press, so I drilled as far as I could go, and then used an extension on a hand drill and finished the job at the bench. So I decided to go with Hovarter? Not sure how you pronounce it, leg vise, the VX20, and the X-link that comes with it. So I've already got the bore and counterbore done for the shaft. That's taken care of. Next I need to route out everything for the X-link. And I've got the directions, and honestly I'm struggling a little bit making sure I'm doing this right. But everything is laid out based on a center line, and then you're routing 2 different grooves, one on either side of the center line, which of course come together to form the full mortise that you need. There's 3 different depths that you have to route to. So I'm going to check and double check and triple check these instructions before I plunge into this, just to make sure I don't get it backwards.
So I'm going to check and double check and triple check these instructions before I plunge into this.
After checking and rechecking all of my layout marks, I was confident that everything matched the measurements on the instructions. The first step is to drill a 3/8 inch hole for the pin that will hold the X-link in place. For the leg, I can follow the same process of drilling as far as I can on the drill press and then finishing the job at the bench. The chop was too large for this, so I used a drill guide and an extra long bit for that. Next up was the routing. The layout for the leg is exactly the same as the layout for the chop. The only difference is the distance from the sides for the router fence position. After another triple check of the measurements, I got to work with the routing. I was happy to see that the end result was a perfect fit of the X-link. So I just made a pretty big and very dumb mistake. That's right, I did it again. If you look closely, you can see what I did. It wasn't my layout. The fit and position of the mortise was dead on. The bore and counterbore for the shaft were right where they were supposed to be. It was all just on the back side of the leg. A pretty big and very dumb mistake. So I patched up my misplaced mortise and re-drilled the counterbore on the outside of the leg, and then I went about remarking my layout. We'll just call that first attempt a practice run. Now the layout is all based on a center line and the center of the shaft. There's a small distance on one side of the center line that gets routed to 1/8 of an inch, then the remainder of that side is routed to 7/8 of an inch. The opposite side of the center line receives a 1 17/32 inch mortise. All very precise dimensions. All a little nerve-wracking, especially if you're doing it the second time around. Here you can see me routing a 1/8 of an inch mortise. I'm routing it to the full length of the layout, and then I clean it up a little bit and remark the layout for the 7/8 inch depth mortise. One side also needs to be notched out to provide clearance for the bolt that connects the two halves of the X-link. I ended up just cutting this by hand with a chisel and a router plane. You can also see in this shot that I'll have to contend with an extra hole from where I drilled the pin for the first time. Since there won't be any hiding that, I'll fill it with the same walnut dowel I'm using for the draw bores and just let it be an accent. Now that same process is repeated again on the back side of the chop. The hole sizes are a little bit different, but that's it. The mortises are all the same, based again on a center line. Once I'm done with the router, I clean everything up with a chisel, and this was also done in the leg the same way. A trick I like to use whenever I'm drilling a through hole with a Forstner bit is that I set the depth on the drill press so that the brad point of the bit will drill all the way through, but the cutting head will not. This leaves a small hole on the other side that you can use to perfectly line up your bit and drill for a tear-out free hole. With the stressful part out of the way, I can move on to shaping the chop. I add a curve on each side with a drawing bow, then take it over the bandsaw to cut it out, and I clean it up with the spindle sander. Next, I cut a large 45-degree chamfer on the top of the front side of the chop, and add a smaller chamfer to the remaining sides at the router table. Then I can take it back to the bench and add the last couple chamfers that the router wouldn't do, and then clean up all the saw marks with my low angle jack plane. The final step is to add in a wear plate on one side of the mortise. After that, we're caught up to where I ended the last video. With the base assembled, I went ahead and applied a finish to it. After that, I installed the wear plate to the leg mortise just like I did with the chop, and then I could finally move on to the top. I'm not going to go through more milling. Let's just say it was a lot, and it took a while. Once it was done, I cut all of my top laminations a little oversized. I need to have a little extra material to account for the cleaning up of the laminations and flattening the whole top when I'm done. I did run them all through the planer just to remove all the table saw marks though. Good morning. Well, at least it's morning for me. So last night I glued up this first side and all went pretty well, but I did run into a couple small issues that I want to account for today, and I want to change some things up when I do the second side of the workbench. It really boiled down to two things. Number one, I don't have a domino, so I didn't put any dominoes between the boards to align them, which in itself, not a big deal. I do have a biscuit joiner, and I really didn't think that would do much, so I wasn't thrilled about trying it. Figured worst case I'd end up just like what happened here. So what did happen is I've got a slight offset between all the boards. They all kind of turned just a couple degrees in the same direction, and this was partially due to the second thing, and that's that I just don't have a lot of short clamps, short parallel clamps. I've got some long ones, and I've got some 36-inch ones, and when I put the long ones on, laying flat like this, it wanted to make the boards twist where I had them over there. And so I had to stand it up. And in standing it up, I think is when everything slid. So I'm going to change that up, and I'm going to glue it up on the assembly table today, which in itself presents a couple challenges. Number one, my assembly table is not long enough for this, which is why I wanted to do it over there. It also, just where it is, clamp placement's going to be a little hard, but the second thing is it's just going to be kind of harder to get all the glue on everything and sit over there. So that's the plan, though, is I'm going to try it on the assembly table, see how it turns out, see if I can account for this. Either way, these are still larger and thicker than I need. I did that on purpose, and I've still got my planer set to the thickness from when I did the width of the boards, so I can start from that point and get these down to flat and square again before I put them on the bench. So I'm going to glue that other one up so that I can get that in the clamps and curing, and then after that I'm going to move on to laying out some joinery in the legs and on the rails so I can get the base together. This is what I meant by hard to reach. After the glue cured on both glue ups, I ran them over the jointer and through the planer to get each lamination flat and square again. Then, before I did anything else, I drilled and tapped the bolt holes for when I attached the top to the base, which will be in the next video. I also countersink each hole before tapping it. I find that this makes it easier to tap and to get the bolts started later. For today, I'll leave it here and just say thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for part 3.